Please be seated. Well, I read this parable and I thought, really? What are we going to do about this one, right? So here's a man who is not doing really well on his job. So he's about to get fired. And so the response is to go out and cut the debt of those people who owed his boss. So he sort of defrauds the boss now, right? And the weird turning point here is that instead of getting fired and sued, he gets commended and keeps his job. Now, how did that happen? Right? I know. It's kind of shocking. Well, that's what parables do. They shock. And often we lose the shock because times have changed between when they were first told and today. And so we kind of lose that shocking element about them. This one did not. The shocking element is still there because it's so countercultural, even for us today. So, as often happens, when Jesus tells a parable, it's to turn things around, to give people a different perspective, to show them that the way they have been viewing the world or the way they have been understanding who God is off. And so the parables are often there to turn things in a way to get better clarity of how the world is, how we should live in the world, or who God is and how we should relate to God. Jesus is God made known. And so here's Jesus' critique of this world and these systems that have been around forever. And that is that our economic systems of our world don't work right for people. In those days, people, if they were indebted, if they owed money, they could be put in prison for owing money. Or they could become enslaved to the people they owed money to. Until they could pay their debt, would they be released back in. So these things were serious. Owing money was really, really a bad situation. And often people fell in debt. Because if you're a farmer or a fisherman and you don't catch any fish or you don't harvest enough food, now you're in debt. You don't even have enough money for the seed for the next season, right? And so here you get yourself further and further behind. So lots of people ended up being in prison or ended up being in servitude of other people. And so here's Jesus saying to them, this man who's really, really wealthy, how did that happen? How did this man become so wealthy? And we hear it, what's the word we use, Deacon Victoria? Dishonest wealth?
Dishonesty.
Dishonest wealth, right? It's the dishonest wealth. And another word, that's right, another way to do that is to say it's unjust wealth. Wealth that has been earned unjustly. And I think the reason why this parable has not lost its shocking value is because we can really relate to this system today. There are still lots of people who are in debt today. And we say, well, we don't put them in jail, do we? We do. And you may say, oh, but they don't become enslaved or they're not enslaved to this, are they? What? Say that again, Anne? Yes. It keeps people burdened and in bondage when people are in such heavy debt. It ruins people's lives. And so Jesus is telling his disciples, look, this world, the way it works, is not just. So you have to figure out how to live in it and make it work for the poor. Make it work for the lowly. Make it better for the people, and figure out how the system works and make it work for your people, so that you could turn this around and make it better for those who are getting clobbered. And these people, they have figured out, right? There's people who are figuring out how to make more money. They're figuring out how to exploit the laws and how to get the kickbacks and how to do it legally, right? It's all legal. But it ain't working for most of us. And for some of us, it's putting us under. And so Jesus is saying to them, you've got to figure out a way of how to make it work for people, to make it better. Got to be suave about it, cunning about it. And that's why I think it speaks to us today, because we can see that. We can see that in our communities. We can see that in how it's affecting our families. And how we engage in this system, how we participate in the system, whether implicitly or explicitly, there are consequences. And you may say, well, I'm not a billionaire. What do I have to do? Or you may say, well, this congregation, well, we're not a big corporation. How could we, what are we doing? Right? But we are responsible. We do have to reflect. And so yesterday we went out, 10 of us gathered and 9 of us went out to walk in the neighborhood and to go see what is going on out there in their community. And it was really interesting to me that one of the things that we discovered is that some of these houses are not homes for people to live in on a long-term basis, whether renters or owners. You know what they are? Airbnbs. Oh, and you're with it. You're on today. You should come up here. Yeah, Airbnbs. And what is an Airbnb? It's this great thing, right? You go to another town, you find a nice house, you rent it for your family, you spend some wonderful time by the beach or in the mountains or in a city, and then you go home to your home, right? But what is it doing to the neighborhoods that are in it? I'm telling you, I love those Airbnbs. We've had wonderful vacations with my family. But I don't like them in my neighborhood, because it's taking it apart. More and more houses are now empty throughout the year, except for ACL, South by Southwest, CODA or whatever else. And then they rent them $300, $400, $500 a night. So they make way more money than renting it for a family or for a couple or for a single person or for anything, right? Or selling it, right? So how does a family who's about to start their life together in a home can afford a house when you're going up against an investment firm can just drop a lot more money? So what are we seeing in Austin? Less housing available, and the housing that is here is unbelievably expensive. There are consequences. There are consequences to how we engage in the system, whether implicitly or explicitly. But I want to share with you another story about another organization. It's called RIP, Medical Relief Service. Some of you may have heard it. It is an organization that has figured out how debt works. And what people do, or companies do, or investment people do, they go out and they buy debt in huge bulks. And then they get it, they pay a fraction, like a hundredth of a point of what they buy, right? So if somebody owes $100, they just buy it for $1. But then guess what they do, right? They'll go and they'll send you the letter and says, oh, you don't owe company A, now you owe company B, and they keep charging you the same amount of money you owe company A, even though you, company B, only paid 100th of the price, right? So you're making a lot of money. So this organization said, oh, so that's how it works? All right. So RRP, Medical Relief Services, what they do is they go buy lots of debt, medical debt. Because for those of us in the United States, most of people's debt and most of what puts people into bankruptcy is medical expenses. They get in over their heads because they have to have a surgery. And all of a sudden, now you owe $100,000, and how do you pay that back? You have an accident, and you're in the emergency room. You're not going to say to them, I don't have money. They take in, they go, and they help you, they put you back together, and then they give you a very nice bill. Now you spend your life paying back sometimes. So they do this. They go buy debt, medical debt, they bundle it all together, and they pay 100th of the point, and they use this money from nonprofit. They get money from people who donate money to them, and then they send out letters. And instead of the letter saying, hello, Mrs. Skeith, now you owe me $10,000 instead of Deacon Victoria, they say, congratulations, your debt has been paid for. They relieve people of medical debt. It's a life-changing moment for people when they get these letters. And they've helped millions of people be relieved from medical debt. So they have figured out how it works. They have figured out the system. And now they're making it work and make it better for people. So how we engage in this economic system matters, whether implicitly or explicitly. It matters. And so the question for us is, how do we participate? What is our role? How do we do this? Both personally, individually, in our families, and with ourselves, and as a congregation. How do we engage? And what are we to do? And the prophet Amos says, you've got to take care of the poor. You've got to take care of the lowly, because I will remember how you treat them. I will remember. So our invitation this morning is to think about that, to think about how we engage, to think about how we participate, and what are things that we can do both individually and as a congregation so that we can hear Jesus say to us, you've got to go out there and make it better for the people. You have to figure out how to live in this world and make it better. That is going to require for all of us to be leaning into God and God's ways and moving away from this God of wealth, because we cannot serve both. We cannot be in bondage to both. If we're going to be in bondage to someone or to something, let it be to God and to God's ways, because that's where the permanence is. It's in love, it's in charity, it's in compassion, it's in joy. Because this worldly things, this unjust wealth, passes us by. And so I invite all of us to reflect, to pray, to discern. So together we can figure out, how do we live in this life to make it better for all of us? Amen.